Good afternoon and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. We're very pleased to welcome Nicolai von Ondarza from the Stiftung für Wirtschaft und Politik in Berlin. He's an old friend of the Institute and he knows us well. So we go straight into it. He is going to speak to us for about 20 minutes and then we go Q&A with the audience. So you'll be able to join the discussion using the Q&A function on Zoom, which is on your screen. So send your questions throughout the session as they occur to you, and then we'll ask Nicolai to deal with them at the end. And please indicate who you are. So if I can introduce Nicolai, and then I will hand over to him. Nicolai is the head of the EU Europe Research Division at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs in Berlin, and also an associate fellow at Chatham House. And his research focuses on Germany's role in Europe, EU politics and institutions, EU-UK relations, as well as democracy in Europe. So as part of his work, he has been a consultant to the German government, the Bundestag, the UK government, the European Parliament and the European Commission. So we're looking forward to what you have to say to us, Nicolai. Thank you.
Yeah, so welcome everybody from my side. Happy to be here. And I'm going to present or try to present from the outside my view of the new German government. Just currently checking. Yes, my presentation here is online. We're not now just about 2 weeks into the new German government. Friedrich Merz has already been called the Außenkanzler in Germany, the chancellor who always looks at foreign affairs, because he's been traveling to Paris, to Warsaw, to Brussels, to the European political community, to Lithuania. So lots of ambitions to have a much more active role in European and foreign and security policies. And I want to use my 20 minutes to give a short view to the back. What happened, why we had these snap elections, which are still a rare occurrence in Germany, about our new government, what the government is based on, then have a bit of a look into its foreign security and EU policy ambitions, also how they regard to Ireland, and then finally close up with some final thoughts. So should it work here? Yeah. No. Okay. Perfect. So I want to start with the election result and the elections themselves. So for Germany, it's still quite unusual to have snap elections. I think it's fair to say that Germany's post-Second World War politics was characterized by huge political stability. I mean, if you look at, for instance, Angela Merkel or Helmut Kohl, so the two previous chancellor from the center right, each of them served for 16 years each. We have a constitution that makes it very hard to call for snap elections. You actually need to have a successful vote of no confidence that has to be called by the chancellor, him or herself. Not even the opposition can just call for a vote of no confidence into the chancellor to get snap elections. Why did we have these snap elections? Because the previous coalition, the so-called traffic light coalition of the SPDs, the Greens and the Liberals, was a coalition that stretched the center ground, but was almost constantly infighting, especially in the last year. The final straw was their fight over the budget in 2024. But I think it's worth highlighting, if we talk about foreign and security policy, that the government collapsed on November the 5th, so the day that Germany found out that Donald Trump was re-elected in the United States. So even that didn't keep the coalition together, but rather forced German politics to a head, saying, okay, if these three parties cannot agree, we need snap elections. But snap elections in the UK, in Germany, don't mean snap elections within a few weeks, but rather a few months. We had these elections then only at the end of February, and a new government then finally in the beginning of May. So almost half a year for these snap elections to produce a new government. What is important for the election results are a couple of things that I will just highlight for our discussions on foreign security and EU politics. I think the first important one is that the far-right Alternative für Deutschland, which has recently been branded by German intelligence service as a far-right extremist party, won over 20% of the vote, almost doubling their vote share, and for the first time being the second largest party. But I will come back to that later on. Still a very clear so-called firewall in Germany of no cooperation with the AfD. The second important point to consider maybe for the Irish audience is that Germany has also, out of the experience of the Weimar years before the Second World War, a strict 5% threshold, so that you need 5% of the votes at least to enter the parliament. And here you can see two parties, the Liberals, who have been thrown out of parliament, but also a new far left populist party, the Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht, who just about didn't make it into parliament. And this fact made it possible for the SPD and the center-right CDU, CSU to have an absolute majority together in parliament. And it also meant that at least the wing of the populist in the parliament is a bit smaller, as the BSW was also very friendly, or is also very friendly towards Russia, and let's say an alternative viewpoint on where Germany should stand in foreign and security policy. And so the major outcome after the elections, to make a long story short, was that there was only one feasible political coalition. Mathematically, the CDU-CSU under Friedrich Merz could also have worked together with the AfD, but they ruled that out before the elections, after the elections, and said they will not even talk with them about potentially working together. And so the only really alternative was going back to what used to be called a grand coalition, because those were the two parties dominating Germany's politics in the last 70 years. But now they just barely have just above 50% of the seats in the Bundestag, and together not even 50% of the votes. Which brings me to my second point, the government formation, which can take quite long in Germany usually. I looked at the figures in the past. It used to be the case that it could take up to 170 days. That would has taken us well into the summer. But the government formation took place under very peculiar geostrategic circumstances. You might remember at the end of February, around the time of the German elections, there was this, let's say, tense discussion between Vladimir Zelensky and Donald Trump and J.D. Vance in the White House, and the US starting to pull support for Ukraine, took away intelligence support, even threatened to stop support altogether. And there was this general impression in Germany that the parties could not afford such a long period of negotiations, and that even on election eve, Friedrich Merz, the new chancellor, has said we need a government by Easter. They did not quite make it, but at least they managed to agree a coalition treaty by April in this only political possible constellation. But and I will also come back to that in the end. You can see already the fragility of this coalition on the day where Friedrich Merz actually was meant to be elected, just about 2 weeks ago on the 6th of May, where for the first time in Germany's history, a chancellor did not get the sufficient votes in the Bundestag on his first attempt. Because presumably at least 18 of his own MPs from the CDU, CSU and the SPD did not vote for him, but they could at least repeat the vote on the same day, and he finally entered into office on the 6th of May. And I will close the part about the elections there in a very different German parliament, in the sense which you can see here on the right, where now for the first time you don't have any liberals, and you have this huge blue block here in the Alternative für Deutschland as the second largest group, which are now much more visible, much more hearable in German parliamentary debate, even if the firewall still holds to such an extent that they did not get any committee chairs, but they are certainly much more visible in the parliament and in German politics. Now, what does the new German government actually want in foreign security, defense, and EU politics? And I think the one word or the two words that Friedrich Merz continuously uses about Germany are responsibility and leadership. And so his ambition really is to, he says Germany is back, that after a government under Olaf Scholz, which, as I said, was very inward looking due to all the infighting, he wants to take a stronger role on the European and international scene. But there are, I think, quite some deserved question marks. But I'll go a little bit deeper into what they actually want and the changes they already implemented. And I guess the biggest changes was certainly in security and defense, where Germany already since 2022, so the full invasion of Ukraine, had this so-called Zeitenwende, the watershed moment, where it had an increase in defense spending, but still had a very strict fiscal rule, the so-called debt brake or Schuldenbremse. And one of the first things that Friedrich Merz did was, with a little bit of a parliamentary trick, that even before the new coalition was in place, he used the majorities of the old Bundestag, which was still in place for a month, to reform the German constitutions with a two-third majority. And made major changes to the fiscal foundations. First, in form of a special fund for infrastructure and climate in the size of 500 billion euros for 10 years, so roughly 50 billion a year, so significant even for the size of the German economy. And then they completely exempted defense spending above 1% of GDP from the debt brake, so completely taking it out from any, at least, sort of legal limits in terms of government spending. And maybe less important for our discussions was that they eased the debt brake for regional government. And what is interesting to me is that the whole argument for changing the debt brake, and Ireland will be especially aware of Germans' austerity politics, preaching fiscal austerity also to its European neighbors, insisting very strongly on fiscal rules, especially coming from the CDU. And just a couple of weeks before the elections, Friedrich Merz himself said several times that the fiscal rules should not be changed. So the whole reason for changing that fiscal rule was really given by Friedrich Merz. He said that the twin threat of the ongoing Russian invasion of Ukraine, and that we can no longer rely on the US as an ally, and there's huge demand for Germany and Europeans to take more responsibility. Here again is his favorite word for European security, and therefore that Germany needed to step up. And you could see that not only in this decisions, but ever since, there's been a really gradual change. Just to highlight a couple of points, Germany now endorsed, which I find quite interesting, the initial push by Donald Trump for a 5% goal for security and defense spending in NATO, a little bit reinterpreted that they say they aim towards 3.5% plus in defense spending, plus 1.5% on wider security spending, for instance, on infrastructure for Germany until 2032, and that they want to increase German defense spending by 0.2% per year of GDP. And if you think back about a Germany that really couldn't hit the 2% goal for many years, to say now we have the ambition for 3.5%, that's really a sea change in Germany. And if we look at the latest figure already, with Germany hitting around a little bit less than 2.1%, Germany has become the fourth biggest spender on the world for defense. So really a sea change. And Merz already also said in his first speech as Chancellor to Parliament that he wants Germany to have the strongest conventional army in Europe. in order to provide deterrence against Russia. And I think it has been quite a long time since a German chancellor has said something like this and then got applause from his European allies, mostly for taking that on. But if implemented, it will certainly change Germany's position in European security. What about the other fields, foreign policy, EU policy in particular, but also relations of Germany to its allies and partners? And here it's quite interesting or for me, there is a little bit of a tension between Friedrich Merz and his coalition, always stressing this point about leadership and wanting to move forward. And then you read the coalition treaty on EU affairs, and it basically reads like previous German policy about the EU. It doesn't have any grand ideas. For those of you who remember the last coalition in 2021, just before the Ukraine war, they started with quite a grand idea. They said, we want to use the conference on the future of Europe to work towards a federal European state, and really had this vision of a huge step in European integration. And you will find that nowhere in this coalition treaty, nor in the first public speeches by Friedrich Merz or his new foreign minister. But what you have is, I think, also an awareness of the necessity of flexibility in this difficult geostrategic situation, and what I would call ambitious pragmatism. I talked to one of the people involved in the EU chapter of the coalition treaty, and this person said that their prime ambition was really not to make too many red lines. So really not write a coalition treaty where it says no to this, no to Eurobonds, no to defense integration in this part, no to this migration policy. They really wanted to give the government flexibility, and are seeing a moment in time where the EU has need for developing new ideas, but they don't want to make the mistake of sort of putting fixed ideas into the coalition treaty that then cannot be realized because possibly circumstances will change again. I think that is acceptable, but I think it's still notable that this leadership so far doesn't come with any grand proposals that Friedrich Merz seemingly has brought to Macron or Tusk on his first travels around Europe. And this then also means that if you look at the policy proposals in the EU chapter, they basically read like the political agenda of the European Commission anyway. So there's a lot of focus on competitiveness. Of course, from the CDU, there is basically the same shift that Ursula von der Leyen did on the European level, shifting away from the Green Deal to more industrial policy and competitiveness. Still the aim of fulfilling Germany's climate targets, but certainly also making them more business friendly and putting the larger emphasis on competitiveness. There is a strong emphasis on defense. There is, I would note, an interesting chapter on the modernization of the EU budget, where Germany, of course, still is one of the largest, or in absolute term, by far the largest net contributor to the EU budget. So has always been, let's say, try to have frugal partners that put in the vetoes. Previously the UK, now countries like the Netherlands or Austria, Denmark, and so on. And so Germany will not go out and write in its coalition treaty, we want a huge increase in the EU budget. But at least I found it notably, as I said earlier, they did not explicitly rule out any kind of joint borrowing. They didn't speak out in favor, but they also did not explicitly rule it out. And they also said that the budget needs to be modernized and that the repayment for the debt of next generation EU, so the COVID recovery fund, should not go to the detriment of current spending of the EU. And this to me implies an increase of the EU budget, because somewhere the money needs to come from to repay the next generation EU debt from 2027 onwards. So at least I would see that as an opening towards the negotiations on the future EU budget, which could be quite interesting. And then two final points that I would mention for the overall arcing position on European policy is that it's a very strong anchoring of the principle of European strategic sovereignty, also in the tech and digital sphere, but also combined with the competitiveness and defense agenda. There is no, let's say, divorce papers to the transatlantic relationship. So Germany will not by itself say we will no longer work with the Americans on defense. There is a clear acceptance that NATO is the central pillar for territorial defense, but also at the same time lots of emphasis that Europeans need to take, here again the word, more responsibility for their defense, for their technological competitiveness, and get more abilities for Europeans to set the international rules and take care of their sovereignty. And the final point that I want to make here in this section is that there is a lot of emphasis. I don't know how interesting that is to Irish audience, but it's certainly a big discussion point here in Berlin about EU policy coordination. So this is more for the EU nerds, but Germany especially, but not only under the last government, often made the so-called German vote. It even had a name in Brussels, where Germany abstained because the different coalition partners could not agree on their European policies. And this was something that is especially regarded by Merz as having damaged Germany's position in Europe, because Germany either for a long time didn't set a position, or even reversed its position at the very last moment to abstaining, even on areas that are core to German economic interests. For instance, the ICE car ban. This is something where Germany abstained on in the combustion engine car ban on the European level. And so what they want to do is not completely abolish, I don't think that would be possible, the responsibilities of the different ministries that are there in EU policy making in Germany. But what they made for the first time, the Chancellery, the Foreign Office, and the Economy Ministry, so the two ministries which are responsible for EU policy coordination, they are all in the hands of the CDU. So Germany, to some extent, now speaks with one voice in Brussels, and this is the voice of the CDU. The SPD can, of course, still come in over the other ministries if it concerns their areas of expertise, or over the finance ministry, but really the CDU is now the leader in German EU policy. And on the other hand, the Chancellery has an upgraded role, and they have the ambition to have a so-called EU monitoring in the Chancellery, where more often EU questions are then brought in front of the cabinet to take a joint position earlier, and then also work together with partners on that. And this is why I included that, because the whole discussion is always around being able to engage with European partners earlier and with a clear German position, rather than this so-called German vote. Which brings me to my third and final point on the European sphere, and this is the partnerships. And I think this could be interesting for Ireland, both directly towards Ireland, which has become a more important partner for Germany in the last 10 years, but also in the wider field. And I think the first that is interesting is the strong emphasis on flexible partnerships in Europe. So Merz repeats very often that he, on his very first day after being elected, went directly to Paris and Warsaw to engage with France and Poland as the two most important partners, but then also wants to extend this to the so-called Weimar Plus format. So France, Germany, and Poland in the center, then Italy and Spain, plus the United Kingdom. And this is really one of his ideas, to bring the UK back to some extent to the European security debate. And very strongly in several in most of his interviews, when he speaks about foreign policy and the European positions, he always stresses it's EU plus UK. So he really wants to bring the UK in. Then there is this self-perception of, again, the word of responsibility to listen and integrate the small and medium-sized partners in the EU. So the Merz says he wants to orient himself in the image of Helmut Kohl, which had this idea that Germany is the large country that brings the small countries in. And so really the ambition to not only work with the Weimar Plus, but also rather smaller and medium-sized countries. And here I think Ireland will be important. Germany and Ireland, I think now on their third joint plan of actions. And this will be, I think, an important partner on some policy areas, but not on all, I think, on defense and security, but more on the economy, on climate, energy policy, competitiveness, digital regulation. I think this will be areas where Ireland will be important. And then it might be interesting to you that there's been support for the EU-UK agreement here. It's not been at the center of debates. So Germany, for instance, is not that interested in the fishery aspect of it, but there was a push to get the defense and security partnership agreed. There, Germany certainly had an interest in, as I said earlier, to keep the UK in. And there is the intention to strike a friendship treaty bilaterally with the UK. Already the last German government wanted to do that, and they had the treaty around 90% negotiated. And so the ambition is to finish that treaty by the summer break. So you will probably see an agreement on that in June or July if the government can keep pace. And then I want to mention one critical point that certainly already crept up, is that for all his rhetoric on pro-European and leadership, Merz and the CDU-CSU think very nationally on migration. Migration has, of course, been one of the core points in the election campaign, also driving the AfD vote. And so one of the first actions that the government did was hugely increasing the border controls and also wanting to... The right word, I need to think about the right word in English. It's not pushback, but give back asylum seekers directly at the border to countries like Poland, who do not want to do that. And so already this is an area where there's a tension with the European leadership ambition and Germany's partners directly at the borders, and also European law. So I think this will be something to watch on how this core policy areas here the German government can, let's say, put it into balance with this European leadership ambition. I want to finish, to not speak too long, with the last point, which I think is important to convey, is the mood in Berlin. And the mood in Berlin is certainly not about a honeymoon period of this government. So the support for the government is already quite small. I said in the beginning, they didn't even get 50% of the votes, only 50% of the seats in the Bundestag. And directly after the election, as you can see here in the polling average, especially the CDU-CSU went down. And there were even a couple of points here in the around 2 or 3 weeks ago where the AfD was the largest party in the polls. And so for now, this translates very much into a feeling that this is a government of last chance. This is something that many people in the CDU-CSU say, who are very firmly on that there cannot be any kind of cooperation with the AfD, but also saying that if we do not get it right this time, we do not know what will happen in 2029, and the AfD could potentially be the largest party, and what we do then there. And this has meant that for now, I think the government has been willing to take more risks, including on the fiscal policy decisions, including on security and defense. But depending on how long polling would be negative for them, there could also be quite a bit of nervousness, especially amongst the CDU-CSU. But I just wanted to finish on that note here that for all the ambition of this German government, also Friedrich Merz will have to have quite a big of a look to the coherence of its own party, whether they can maintain this firewall nationally and regional, and whether he can keep this coalition together and demonstrate with this coalition to Germans that it's not worth changing to the populist, now really far-right extremist AfD, and that parties of the center-right and the center-left can deliver. And with this, I would close, and I'm looking forward to the questions and the discussions.